Hello and welcome to Your Daily Detroit, sharing what to know and where to go in Southeast Michigan. I'm Jer Stays, and on episode 1053 of the show, we're talking about the power of porches and design with Matt Mosher of Dzinly, a Royal Oak-based startup that helps you with the design of the exterior of your house. Then I'll send you out the door with 3 things to know around town. Matt Mosher joins me on the virtual porch now.
Thanks a lot, Jerry. Appreciate being here.
Yeah, I looked at the information behind Dzinly, and I just think it's great that a startup or a business like yours is here in Metro Detroit and doing the kind of things you're doing. So why don't we kind of get started with the idea to introduce people? Like, what is Dzinly and kind of what got you the idea to start this?
Dzinly is an exterior design service for your home. So as most of the listeners know here is it's really difficult to decide how to maybe improve the outside of your home, whether it's painting it a new color or should I put shutters on or should I not? So our service provides that. You just literally take a picture of your house. We have a big network of designers, and within about 24 hours, you get design ideas. And then from those design ideas, you'll be able to see exactly what those ideas look like on your house through some renderings that we give you. And then it goes as far as giving you the exact color, the exact material, so that you can go and talk to your contractor or purchase those at the store. So it's a very, very efficient way to take the anxiety out of improving or designing the outside of your house.
So what drew you to this to say, hey, this is a service that needs to exist?
I happen to be a lifelong entrepreneur. Started my first company when I was 17. It was a landscape company. I had no clue what I was doing. I basically just took a few pictures of my parents' backyard and went around my neighborhood with a flyer I had put together. And literally the rest is history. I was fortunate to build that company to a very successful landscape architecture firm, which still exists. And there's plenty of fun stories along the way learning how to do that. But as I got later into my career, I've been at it now for about 22 years, I started to realize that when I would present plans to people, they really had no clue what they were looking at. They were looking at a sheet of paper with lines, and literally they're just trusting the person they're meeting with is an expert and crossing their fingers that, hey, this is going to turn out, my house or my landscape or whatever the design may be is going to turn out. So about, 8 or 9 years ago, I decided that I was going to invest in some young talent. I went to Lawrence Tech University and I put a flyer up on their board. And I tried to attract some students and literally paid these students to learn how to do 3D renderings. So 3D renderings are getting pretty popular now, but 8, 9 years ago, they were pretty much non-existent for the average kind of residential deal. So I got these guys in and paid them. They learned and learned and learned. And over a year, we started to be able to render exactly what we drew on the plan. So we would show up at these meetings and we would show the client the plan, and we could see in their head, they were like, okay, I have no clue what this is going to look like. And then we would pull out the rendering and they would literally like drop to the floor. They'd be like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? That's what that's going to look like. And so we started doing that for every project in our other business. And we slowly, I shouldn't say slowly, we quickly became the leader. We were literally landing every job that we were competing against because the other guys couldn't show a 3D rendering. So even though it might have been a better design maybe, or maybe not, we were winning the jobs because the client could understand what they were buying. Fast forward a few years and I said, this could be a huge thing for everybody in the whole United States. Like, what if people could connect up and say, hey, first of all, I need ideas because I have no clue what to do. And second of all, I want to see what those ideas look like. And literally, that's how Dzinly was born. My wife and I were on a flight one day. We were talking a little bit about it. She gave me some inspiration. And the next day, I talked to some of these gentlemen that were working with me on renderings. I said, hey, guys, we're starting a company today. And this is what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. Fast forward now, 2.5, 3 years later, we have an amazing business that I would say officially launched in January. It was up for a little while in beta testing, and we're rocking and rolling. What we thought was going to happen has worked. We got people coming in left and right with houses needing help on their design.
Well, I know from covering developments around the region that a well executed rendering that's believable, that, people can see and they can relate to, it changes public opinion in a major way. Like, there's kind of a joke in coverage of like, oh, well, there's a pretty rendering, but the pretty rendering impacts a lot of people because they can understand a lot more than, say, the financials.
100%. I mean, most people are unable to visualize how things are going to look or whatever. So anytime you put a picture in front of somebody, no matter what industry it's in, you're right, Jared, it makes it so much easier for them to say, oh my gosh, I love that, or oh, I hate that, I better figure out something else.
I remember from my consulting career in the past of the clients who would say, I know it when I see it. And I feel like this kind of thing helps people know it when they see it.
It does, and it's been extremely rewarding. We've had people that write us letters or emails just saying, hey, we've been really struggling with our home for a number of years, and within 1 week you guys basically made us so happy, and now we're going to have the home we've always wanted.
Well, it's got to feel good to have something have uptake like that and to have that success. Because, I think sometimes people get caught into the dip. There's a term that Seth Godin has, the famous advertising guy, marketing guy, talks about, the dip and the challenges. So it's got to feel good to feel some initial traction and see that go, oh, okay, people actually want this thing.
It's very exciting. It's very exciting because, you have different levels of individual. You have the 1%ers who have large homes and have the means to afford expensive designers, and then you have the rest of us, right? The rest of us, we're not necessarily going to go out and spend $10,000 to get somebody to give us ideas for our home, or $5,000 or whatever it may be. So this service is been so cool because the average homeowner, whether it's $100,000 home or a $500,000 home, those are the clients that we're serving. And those clients up to now didn't have the resource like they have with Dzinly unless they were willing to spend a lot of their hard-earned money. So that's what's really, really rewarding and cool to me about this.
As somebody who likes spaces with people and likes neighborhoods and things that bring people together, one of the things that I noticed is you've got some tips around porches this summer. And I think the porch is so underutilized by so many people, whether it's a porch or a patio space. And I think it's a great way to bring people together, almost like little community gatherings right where you are, whether it's your back porch or like what's common in places I've lived where the front porch is something you get people that talking when they walk their dog or having conversations. It's just a special place. So why don't we talk about front porches and why they matter and some of the things that people could think about when they're putting together their porch?
Front porches were always just sort of a thing that we thought of in the backdrop of our minds. But when the pandemic hit with COVID, it really put these outdoor spaces, whether it's front or rear porches, back to the forefront. People weren't doing their daily grind where they were getting up early and heading out the door and getting on the road and then getting home tired at 5 or 6 or 7 p.m. and doing a couple quick things and going to bed. They were home all day. They were working from their computer or whatever. So what we found in our business is that porches have become literally the most requested ask through our site in terms of wanting to add one or update one on people's homes.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. And, the porch, it should live the same as you live on the inside of your house. It doesn't have to just be a blank surface with a roof over top. And that's what people are really starting to find is that they can accessorize these porches. They can make them charming. They can make them an extension of the architecture of their home and really create a nice gathering place or a place to sit out and watch the traffic go by or whatever your view may be.
For sure. And like on my place, I feel like the front and back porches serve different kinds of purposes. Like the front porch, people come by and almost, spontaneously visit. Whereas the back porch is a more chill situation, hang out with the dogs. I think it's important that people think about the purpose before they get into this.
Yeah, 100%. You gotta, and that's where you really gotta start is say, okay, what do we really want for the lifestyle that we live? Some of us are huge outdoor people in the nice, summertime weather, and others of us like to be inside most of the time. The first thing is defining the purpose, right? So if it's the front porch, is the purpose just to give my house some nice dimension and architecture? Or am I actually going to go sit out there and conversate with my neighbor walking his or her dog? So once you define that purpose, then you can start to plan what that porch might look like.
So what are some of the things that you suggest for people for porches?
The first thing you want to do is you want to make sure that any space that you walk into feels warm. It feels cozy would be a good word. Feels like a space that invites you. To make that happen, you start to layer things in from we'll call it the walls out. So what we always like to do is we like to evaluate the color scheme. Color is a huge factor in how our brains decipher a space in terms of whether we want to be in it or not. Some tones of color make us feel cold, other tones of color make us feel warm. So when we look at these outdoor spaces, generally what we help our clients with is starting by, what is the color? What is the ceiling? Is it a stained wood or is it a painted wood? What is the flooring? Is the flooring more monochromatic decking? And a lot of that plays into what the style and what the feel that the person wants. So that's where we kind of start, is that. And then we start to move in, right? We start to look at, okay, now that we got the color based on the architecture of the house, the feeling you want it to have, how do we lay that space out? What's in that space? Do we have just some rocking chairs? Do we have a fire table with a couch set up? And a lot of that is obviously based on what you want to use your space for. So it's really important to, one, dial in the colors, and then two, start to figure out what you're going to use that space for, which will dial you into the furniture arrangements and things like that.
Yeah, and one thing that I found, at least in my backspace, is the use of lighting really matters. So I have hanging lights, and I sprung a little extra for lights that shed more light. They serve a couple of purposes. One, they light the way for my senior dog to be able to do her thing, but also they are attractive so you can just hang out there and have dinner. It almost gives a soft light whenever you want, so you can almost go out and have a patio dinner whenever you want. And I think important in that is choosing like the right lights for your space and what works for you and what's the vibe that you want to have.
Yeah, you're totally right, Jeremy. That's a great point to bring up. And just as important as the colors and the furniture is the lighting. It creates ambiance, obviously, especially at night. And we look at lighting in a few different areas of a porch. One is your typical recessed or can lighting in the ceiling. We always recommend a more yellow tone rather than a daylight spectrum light. The more yellow tones provide generally a better feeling to us as people. And we always recommend that those ceiling lights are on dimmer switches, because there's nothing better than having the ability to dim those lights down and really create the mood that you want to, whether it's bright or dim. And the other things that we look at with lighting is there's some fun stuff you can do. I mean, the string lighting, the bistro lighting is extremely popular now. We make a lot of recommendations on that. It gives it, again, a very nice ambiance, something that you might find as you're, strolling a major city with the outside bistros. 100% correct. I mean, lighting is just as important as the rest of the areas.
Yeah, and a couple other things, stairs and railings. Like my back porch stairs are going to need to get redone soon. And I think that's important too, making sure that they fit everything that you're doing, especially if you've got the coin to do it. Or say just redoing a railing can be a way to help out your porch without maybe rebuilding the entire thing,
100%. I mean, when we get these projects through Dzinly and they're looking for porches, one of the things that we often do a lot for clients is we show them different railings, because it really makes a big difference, as you're alluding to, not only from a safety perspective, but if you have a small space, for example, maybe it's only 8 or 10 feet deep out from your house, if you put a solid rail or a solid wall, it'll generally make that space feel too tight. So what we'll recommend is more of an open feel, whether it's just a standard, nice, clean picket style with 4-inch gaps in between, or whether it's maybe more of a modern look where it's cable rail or even glass. So you're 100% spot on that railing is so important to balance that aesthetic as well. And then when it comes to steps are huge because they are really like a strong element visually. So when you put steps on your porch, what we always try to do is we try to line them up with like the center of your door, because your door is a prominent aspect of your house. And so what you want to do, if your steps are off by, let's say, 2 feet from the center of your door, it'll look really weird to your eye. So if you have the ability to, you always want to line the steps up with your door, and you always want to make your steps at least as wide as your door at a minimum. If you have a 4-foot wide door, you want to make sure your steps are a minimum of 4 feet wide, ideally 5 or 6, to create the right architecture that'll want to kind of bring you into that space.
Well, and that balance seems so simple, but I see people violate that all the time.
They sure do. And, most people just, sometimes they don't understand or don't know, or sometimes it's not easy for them to visualize. But if with anything in architecture, if you can take the prominent points on your house and balance strong elements off of that, meaning centered off of those, it generally is the most pleasing architecture.
Well, and you think about cities and places where the stoop is so important. There are some places in Detroit like that, but there's also places around the country where you have places that the step is the front way, right? There really isn't a yard per se in a townhouse or in different kinds of architectural styles,
Right. And, we're diverging into steps, which is a good thing to talk about. And it's not only like the width of the steps, but how deep is what we call the tread. So the tread is the area that you step onto. So inside your house, the normal staircase is going to have a 10-inch tread. Well, on the outside, 10 inches just feels way too small. So when we design steps, especially on like a front porch, we always tell clients, ideally, those treads should be 16 to 18 inches wide. 1, it's a very comfortable step. And 2, it really gives nice proportion. Anything 12 or under just starts to feel very, very tight. And in some houses, depending on the scale of the house, we'll go up to like a 24-inch tread. But as you're designing your porch and the front of your house, that's a really good thing to consider, is how wide are my steps and how deep are my treads. And then in terms of like, how many steps do I need? We have found over the years that stepping up 6 inches is the ideal, what we call riser. So the riser would be from where you step from one step up to the next. The ideal perfect riser is 6 inches. We generally don't like to exceed 7 inches. 8 inches is code in most cities, but if you can achieve that 6-inch step, you'll really have a perfect scenario.
And what kind of materials are you seeing for porches nowadays? Like, I'm familiar with a lot of times where porches were built a certain way, but if someone needs a new porch or if they're doing something or they're doing steps, what are you kind of seeing as the trends right now?
The composites are huge. So when I say composites, these are materials from brands such as Trex or Azek, and they're basically just a synthetic wood type product, although a lot of the products they sell now don't even have wood grain. They've got other fancy, fun things. So that type of product is a really great product to use from a cost perspective. Yes, you're going to generally pay a little bit more than like a natural wood, but you're going to have zero maintenance, which is amazing. And then the other products that are very popular these days is these what we call the larger slab paving materials. So I would say, back in the 90s, we're talking about, having material like small brick pavers and things like that. Now what's popular is larger slabs. So things that are maybe 24 inches by 24 inches or around that size if you're not going to go with a composite decking.
Gotcha. Well, is there anything else to share before I let you go, Matt? Because I feel like I've learned way more about the porches that I like to sit on than I ever thought I would.
Yeah, you can really dive deep in those porches. But no, I think, Jerry, had some great questions, and hopefully I was able to provide some good insight.
Well, thank you for joining us, Matt Mosher. It's Dzinly, DZINLY.com. I'll make sure to have a link in the show notes. Thanks so much for your time, and, have a safe virtual walk home, man.
Thanks a lot, Jerry. Appreciate your time, too.
First reported by us at Daily Detroit, the Lucky Duck restaurant in downtown Clawson has suddenly closed. Their owner, Chef Grant Vella, posted about it on the company account, then deleted it. But friend of the podcast, East Englishman on Reddit, sent in a photo of their front door with a note that matched the post on social media, and their website is now completely shut down. The Lucky Duck opened with a lot of fanfare last year around its Korean-inspired food and goals to pay a living wage to employees. A new report is out showing Detroit's most dangerous intersections and roads for crashes. Far and away, Gratiot, or M3 as it's a state road, hits the top of the list, responsible for 1.5% of all traffic deaths in Michigan. Now, 1.5% might not sound like a lot, but that's a huge number for one road. Crash deaths are up 50% year over year in Detroit as well, outpacing much of the rest of the country. Detroit is second highest in the nation for our crash fatality rate and third when it comes to pedestrian fatalities. Lists you do not want to be on, especially as a large percentage of Motor City residents do not own cars. The report is called Streets for People, Detroit Comprehensive Safety Action Plan. We may dig into this more in a future episode. And finally, on Friday, General Motors announced that their white-collar workers have to come back to their offices at least 3 days a week. This could have a major economic impact on both Detroit and Warren, two major white-collar employment hubs for the company. The RenCen has sat ghostly quiet since the pandemic started, and speculation has abounded about its future. Some business owners hope that the return of workers mean more lunch and happy hour traffic. The amount of people returning to the RenCen isn't known, but I do know that before the pandemic, the office complex had about 5,000 employees working there. I think I might need to get together with engineer Randy and do a guide for spots to hit outside of the place if you've got time with your lunch break. Do you want to get back into the office? What are your feelings? That or any other feedback? dailydetroit@gmail.com. And we are done for today. Thanks to Claire for joining us as a member at patreon.com/dailydetroit. I hope you do too. With that, I'm Jer Stays. Thanks for listening, and remember that you are somebody. We'll talk soon.